Okay, welcome back to Life's Just Garage. Today we're going to patch a tire in the auto shop here. So start out with, we're going to do this for the students in the class that do this for a job sheet are going to do this on a school vehicle. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pull off the tire for the 2001 Neon that we have in the shop. It doesn't really matter what type of vehicle we're using. A tire patch is the same no matter what you do, no matter what kind of vehicle you have. And this whole procedure is going to be the same. But for our purposes here, we're going to do it on a Neon. Now, these tires don't automatically come with holes in them. So what I'm going to have to do here is, and what I want the students to do is get me once they get the tire ready, and I'm going to drill a hole in it. Everybody seems to have an issue with this, but this is a demo, and this is a school, and this is what we're here to do. So I'm going to drill a hole in that tire, and now I need to mark the location. Usually I would use some chalk, but in this case all I have is a Sharpie. I'm sorry that you can't see that on the video, but I can see it, and I can assure you that that's where it is. So we mark the spot that the puncture is. We mark the sidewall. Then we're going to take it over to our tire machine. But before I can break it down, I have to remove the air. So I take the valve cap off, and then I'm going to go get the valve core remover, which sometimes it's in that drawer there. It shouldn't be, but it ends up in there. That red toolbox right over here is our tire toolbox. It's got all the tire tools and equipment and things in it. So that little valve core remover is hiding down in there somewhere. I usually keep 3 or 4 of them floating around in that. So in case we misplace one or lose one, we have one somewhere. So we pull the valve core out. That's step number 1. As the air is coming out of the tire, I'm going to remove the wheel weights. The wheel weights are going to come off because we're going to end up rebalancing this tire when we put it back on. It is possible to do this without taking the wheel weights off. If that were the case, you just use your piece of chalk and mark the wheel weights so you could put them on, or mark the tire so you could put them back on where the wheel weights were. I want my students to rebalance the tire. That's going to be a separate video as well, but we want to make sure you take the wheel weights off. For our class, that's part of the job. Now we've got the air out of the tire, we've got the wheel weights off. This particular machine is pretty standard. You can see that the far right lever there that I'm pushing with my left foot. That's going to break the bead down. I have to make sure I get that little cup inside right along the bead. So it's pneumatic. It's putting a lot of pressure on that bead to break it down. Once I get the one side done, I flip it around. I'm going to do the other side. You've got to get it lined up. It takes a little bit of skill to do this. This is one thing I want my students to practice a lot with, because the first time you do this, it's very, very difficult. Trying to get that thing to come down at the right angle, hit that bead in the right spot. It can get complicated. So once we have the bead broken down on both sides, I'm going to put it on the plate there on the turntable. You can see this has those clamps that move in and out depending on when I push it. Push it once, it'll go in. Push it another time, it'll go out. What that'll do is that'll kind of lock that wheel in place. So I just set it on there, push that, now it's locked in place. That spins the turntable. Put your foot under it, it'll turn counterclockwise. Put your foot, just step on it, it'll turn clockwise. So we break the bead down, bring this little thing around. That little thing right there comes down, locks in place. You want to make sure that is as close to the wheel as you can get it without touching. We don't want to scratch the wheel, so there's a little adjustment up there I just made with my left hand. A little pry bar that keeps down here. Take that little pry bar, we put it right over the duck's lip. If you look at that thing closely, it kind of looks like a duck, or the duck's bill, I should say. If you look at that closely, it looks kind of like a duck. So we put it right over the duck's bill, wedge that over, prise the tire right off. Then we do the same thing for the bottom bead. It's a little bit trickier because you have to get the pry bar way down in there underneath that bottom bead. Pull the thing up, pull the whole tire up. Make sure you got it all the way under there. And now I got to hold that pry bar down, and it just peels right off. Push that out of the way, and I got my tire. Okay, so now we're ready to patch. If I was going to do a tire replacement, it's essentially the exact same thing, except I take the old tire off and I put the new tire on. I'll show you how to put the new tire on here in a few minutes. But first, I got to find my hole. Again, I can see it. I know you can't see it on the video, but that is where it is. So you just have to trust me on that one, I suppose. Now I've got a tool over here that we can use. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. It actually separates the tire so that you can keep this. It widens the tire, makes it a little bit easier to get at that patch sometimes, and sometimes it's just in the way. So I'm going to show you how it works here, and then I'm going to take it off because honestly I don't really like using it, but some students do, and I don't really care if you do or don't. So you can see how that kind of spreads it out a little bit. I guess you can't really see because of the angle that I got the GoPro on here, but there you go. It spreads it out a little bit more, makes it a little bit easier to get at, but I find that thing is in the way, so I don't usually use it. Next, I want to get the liquid buffer. This is just a tire cleaning compound. Both of those are the same thing, just different manufacturers, so use any one you want. And I always usually grab a little piece of plastic to scrape off the buffer with. There's a thin layer of a protective seal on the inside of the tire that we have to get off because the patch won't stick if it's on there. So basically what we do is pour that liquid buffer on there and then just scrape that small layer of rubber right off. And this is about when I fear that thing gets in my way. So just scrape that thing out of the way, or move that thing out of the way and then scrape. You need to scrape an area about 4 or 5 inches in diameter right over the top of the hole. And you can kind of see that that's a little bit duller than the rest of the inside of the tire at this point. That's because we've scraped off that layer of that sealant that's on there. Next, I'm going to use vulcanizing compound. It's essentially rubber cement, and in fact, I don't think there's any difference between this and the stuff you used when you were in kindergarten. It is rubber cement. Take it off there, and we put a thin layer on, and this is where a lot of students will get in trouble because they'll put way too much of the compound on there. Again, about a 4 or 5 inch diameter right around the hole, and we want a very, very thin layer. The reason you want a thin layer is because you actually don't want the rubber cement to be on there while it's wet. We want it to be dry. This is the patch that I'm pulling out of that box right there. And the patch will not stick to wet cement. It has to be tacky. It has to be a little dry. So we're going to put that on there, but I have to wait for that rubber cement to dry up a little bit before I can do it. So I'm just going to get a couple more things ready while we're waiting, and we'll let that dry up. That's a roller to roll the patch once we get it set in place. I'll take those wheel weights and toss them in our wheel weight recycler. We wait until that thing fills up, and then we take it down to the welding shop and make some fishing sinkers with them. This is the rubber, the bead sealer. It's essentially rubber. It goes on as a liquid, then it dries. We're going to use that to seal the patch up once it's dried up. All I'm doing right now is I'm just kind of sticking my head in there and blowing on that a little bit to try to facilitate the drying process, as it were. And it looks pretty dry. As long as it's dull and not shiny, then you should be good to go. Taking this off is a little tricky. There's a backing plate on there, What you want to make sure you don't do is touch the patch with your fingers. The greases that are in your fingers and the just the human body will cause that rubber to not want to stick. So, do what you got to do. Use a fingernail, get that thing separated without actually touching it, and then put it in place. You want to put the patch right over the hole, obviously. And once you get it down there, we roll that thing on top of it. That makes sure all those seals and all the edges get a good solid contact. Again, there's that dried rubber cement compound that's on there right now. That is binding to that as we speak. So I'm rolling that on there. I'm pressing that on there. My objective here is to get that patch to stick to that rubber cement as much as I can. Next thing I'm going to do once I'm happy with that is I'm going to take that plastic backing off of the patch. You can see the patch in there. I suppose we'll throw that away first. Put some tools away. Now I want to pull this thing off. Usually I'd use a little pocket screwdriver, but I don't have it in my pocket at the moment. So it just so happens that there is a paper clip on the floor right there. Your chances of that happening to you are slim to none. So usually having some sort of a pick or something handy is a pretty good thing to use to get that off. If you happen to have a paper clip on the floor, go ahead and use it. So I'm going to peel that thing off. Got to make sure we get all of that rubber backing off of there. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to get the bead sealer on there. And, well, you'll see what happens after that. So we'll just get this all off of there, get it all cleaned up as best as we can. And take my bead sealer. Again, it's just bead sealer. It's what we would use to seal up the bead. It's also what we would use to seal up the patch. I take a layer of that. Like I said, it's a rubber. Essentially, that's all it is. It goes on as a liquid, and then it dries. It gets tacky, seals everything in place. The patch by itself at this point should work. For years, I didn't do this step. I would just patch the tire, and then I would put it back on. I honestly never had any problems with them. But this is another step that I learned somewhere along the way a couple years ago, and I think it's a good way to just ensure that you have a solid patch in there. You're going to get that tire just like it was when it was brand new. So my patch is installed. Next, all I have to do is put the tire back on. Again, if we were just replacing a tire, this would be where you take your new tire and put it back on the tire machine. So I'll show you how to mount a tire right now, and then I'm going to show you how to test this to make sure that we didn't lose, or I'm sorry, that we did a good job when we patched the tire. I guess I'm remarking it just for the sake of remarking it there. I don't remember why I did that. Otherwise, I'd tell you. So here we go. I've got some rubber lube that we keep right here. All you got to do is spin a couple circles around your bead. That helps us get the bead down onto the wheel once we do the mount. Set that off to the side just like that. We bring that back in. It's already set up. Now this time, I'm going to take that tire and I'm going to put it over the duck's tail, as it were. Spin it clockwise, and we got to hold it down. That is the easiest step right there. And this next one is the hardest one. If you don't hold down right there and hold your hand there as it's turning, you're going to jam the tire on the wheel, and it could cut the bead. So you have to make sure that you get that tire down under that bead, or under the lip in the wheel. Otherwise, it's going to jam up on you, and you're going to ruin the tire. I always turn the valve stem so it's pointed towards the back, just like that, because that's where our air hose is. All right, and there's a fourth lever, a fourth pedal, as it were, down there, right there. So I'm going to fill that up. Be careful with the beads because they'll pop back on in place once you get everything up to pressure. I usually go over pressure a little bit, so if I wanted to end up at 32 psi, I would set this thing at about 36 or 37 because I'm going to lose a couple psi when I go to put the stem back in. But here I've got my valve core remover and my valve core, or this, and you got to kind of put that in place. Try not to lose a whole lot of air that you've already put into it. Once the valve core is in place, it locks everything in place. Then you can put the air back on, then top it off, or take some out if you need to, get it back to whatever you want your pressure to be. Again, for my sake, I want it at 32. So that's what we're going to set it to. All right. Last step. We have to test the tire, and this really is what your grade is based on. If you're one of my students who's listening to this or watching this, this is the step that passes or fails. So what you're going to do now is you're going to take your tire over to me. I'm going to take the spray bottle, and I'm going to spray the puncture, and if it bubbles, you didn't do it right. And if it doesn't bubble, then you did. So here we go. Here's the hole. Spray it down with soapy water. No bubbles. There are no bubbles. We're good.